morning. I'm not feeling that good. I woke up with a fever. Um, and I was like trembly and stuff. I've got a throbbing migraine, but I was compelled to share one of my favorite books of the Bible. And I just want to go through this book. It's relatively short in comparison to many other books. It's got like 10 chapters. But I'm going off of the New Revised Standard Version again, my favorite. And this book, I feel like I'm like really close to the camera. Anyway, this book is one of the books that's allegedly written by King Solomon. If you read the preceding description that this Bible provides, it talks about how this is kind of, I think it's Solomon. It's either Solomon or David listening to Solomon. But anyway, it talks about this teacher. In the beginning verses, talks about the words of the teacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. So it's like, the assumption is that I think it's Solomon, that it was sort of his like retirement work, a very reflective series of verses. But it's for that reason, like, I love the works of Solomon, Proverbs and Psalms. Well, Psalms is by David, but that whole section of the Bible, I think, is chock full of real pragmatic wisdom in the way that it's worded, regardless of the translation, is always, it never disappoints. So I was kind of looking at Ecclesiastes. I don't know if I already mentioned the title, but it's called Ecclesiastes. And for example, he talks about how everything is vanity, and it's kind of depressing when you first read it. It's like nothing new under the sun, all is vanity, no matter how much we toil, everything sort of is consumed by the processes of God's power, you know. And I think Ecclesiastes in a lot of ways expands and acts as the contents which that verse, that infamous or famous verse, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. This book in some ways to me is like when this door opens of that phrase, and this is what it means by that, for the larger part. Like, what does it mean when it says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom? And this book, Ecclesiastes, talks a lot about wisdom and what that means. For example, verse 9 in chapter 1, it says, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. This is like a constant phrase that's repeated throughout these verses. There is nothing new under the sun. Like, whatever it is God has seen before, I get the impression that everything is part of like a cycle. And from that definitive cyclical process, it is meant for us to derive a kind of assurance of meaninglessness. And that sounds depressing, but meaninglessness can be liberating. It's really like a coin. You can look at it in two ways. I think meaninglessness, or vanity, as it says here over and over, it's like a coin, in that you can look at it in the way that things are meaningless, everything's hopeless, why bother? That's the depressive way, like, it sucks, you know. But I think if you choose to look at it through a lens of faith and through a lens of wisdom, It is to say, don't get caught up like the fools do in the waves, in the coming and going of the seasons. Don't be caught off guard. The wise wouldn't be caught off guard by the sort of relentless mysteriousness of God. And to know that in the end, everything is God's. And he even laments in here, it is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. I get the impression the business he's talking about is the business of sort of fighting off our temptation constantly to want some kind of assurance outside of God. The constant erosion of our faith when we witness things in this world like he lists out in this book, some horrible circumstances. And to have our faith be attached to our circumstances. I think it is wisdom in the capacity of a person to do best they can to sever their condition from their faith and not let one be the puppet master of the other with all the movement and strings, but let fear of the Lord suffice. There's a couple key phrases though that I wanted to touch on. It says in verse 12 of chapter 2, so I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the one who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. I really like that verse because it, the analogy of light and darkness, how some things, how wisdom and how righteousness is like light in that it excels darkness. And I think it would be appropriate to also say that obviously light expels darkness, because if you look at the feature of physical light, as soon as the light pops on, those things which are in the area that reflect light illuminate, and the darkness retreats from the light. So this to me is like, I think it's a calling of wisdom begging us to maintain our focus on the light and on the substance of things rather rather than the fleeting darkness that the light inevitably sheds away. To me, that's what I get from it. And actually, there's another verse in the following chapter, chapter 3, verse 15 of Ecclesiastes, that I forgot was here until I reviewed it again. And it's something I had in a previous video. I feel bad because I didn't leave a reference in that previous video, but this actually says basically word for word what I was saying. And I probably got it from this verse. So sorry about the lack of reference in that video. But Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 15 says, that which is already has been, that which is to be already is, and God seeks out what has gone by. Okay, so in a previous video I said, that which will be already is. Meaning, trying to mean that which God wills to be, and what God wills to be we believe to be good, that which God wills to be in our sight, in the mode of the future, might as well already be. And we ought to act and look with that attitude and mindset preceding the actual fulfillment of the will of God, knowing that it is good. So again, to me, that verse, and including this one, is about the assurance of the goodness of God and the inevitability of the fulfillment of God's will as a supplement to our faith. If we know everything's going to be okay, God's will be done anyway, then how much easier it would be in the light of that faith, in the light of that awe, to try to live accordingly, to try to live according to God's will, to try to do righteously. So I was a little surprised at that verse. Couple more. There's one I highlighted. It's in chapter 5, verse 2. Never be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are upon earth. Therefore let your words be few. I am very guilty of violating this one. I'm tempted to say that this is not exclusively literal. That is to say, never be rash with your mouth. I don't think it's just talking about like literal curse words and like being rash with your speech, although it could be applied that way, or that could be a symptom of a bigger problem. I like the part where it says, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God. The reservation of the thought that we ought to put into prayer. The thought that we ought to put into our intention, I would put it that way, not just literal prayer. The reservation that we ought to have is that we ought to abstain from just using God as a kind of dump, as a kind of miscellaneous collection drawer in our kitchen that just catches everything, every little thing, every little frustration, every little... Because while God can address, certainly, and there's no question, God can address, is capable of recognizing every single human plight there could possibly be, and it always is. It is the better part of wisdom to keep that reservation to the best of one's ability and not wholly rely on that, but to try to be independent and to try to grow into that independence of wisdom. There's one more. This video is kind of long, but what was the one about something? Oh yeah, this comes, I think, in the last chapter, or second to last chapter, chapter 10, verse 10. If the iron is blunt and one does not whet the edge, then more strength must be exerted, but wisdom helps one to succeed. I really like how it puts, how to me it reflects the meaning of wisdom, what wisdom actually is. Wisdom is like the application of an efficient mindset. Wisdom is efficiency, so that you skip all the unnecessary hardship. In life, we either learn through instruction, through reverence of a standard, and our standard being God, or we learn through consequence. Wisdom is to learn from instruction, to precede, to preempt the consequence, so that when we are faced with challenges, so that when we are faced with moral dilemmas, or when we're whatever, just day-to-day life, wisdom is to preempt that process of cause and effect, that process of you live and you learn. You can learn so that you live more efficiently in the future. And I think that's what it means by when the iron is blunt, one does not whet the edge, then more strength must be exerted. Because if you're sitting there, chopping wood with an axe, and the axe is blunt and it's just slamming on the wood, the more strength, if you hit it enough, it'll break, but you're going to break your back in the process. Whereas a sharpened axe, an axe which has its edge wet and sharp, will slice through that wood more efficiently. The wood being life, and us being the axe, or our mindset being the axe. So that's what I get from that, and thanks for watching.